Kakalosh Boker Or Shavua Tov Masechet Batra Daf Petet Amud Aleph 89a1. If you remember, we were speaking about the differences between the klalot, which had to do with Mamash and Yana Diyoma, the exact same day. We were speaking about the klalot of what happened with HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the Berachot and Moshe Rabbeinu. We said that Moshe Rabbeinu came and he blessed them with 8, but then he cursed them with, right, the entire 22 letters of the alphabet. Right, we said that he blessed them with 8, but it started Vayayim Shamoah Tishma, and it went until the right Leovdam, and he cursed them with 22, but it started Vayayim Lo Tishma until Ve'en Koneh, which was the entire set of the alphabet. We're starting today, right now, something new. We're on the 2 dots, 3 lines down. Okay, we just said like this: Makom shenagu lamod begasa, right? Gedula, meaning it all depends on what type of measuring tool you are using. If the minhag is to do a certain thing, you go like the minhag, and then that's it. Fine. Says the Gemara. Okay, it's going to give you some mnemonic, right? But it's in brackets. But just to pay attention, it's going to be emayinim and gochim bagadamin and flitra, different things. So let's start. Tarabanan. We learned in a braita. Minayin she'en mochakin b'makom shegochim. How do we know that it's going to be prohibited to straighten the schora, which is going to be sold, right, with the gova of the difanot, right, basically with the height of the walls of the utensil? If the minhag is to do it, right, b'tzura gedusha, which means, remember, gadush, you always say maleh v'gadush. Wasn't it maleh? Maleh means full, and gadush means above, okay? And then you have machuk. Machuk is like machak. You're racing. It's flush. It goes straight on. So how do we know that you're not going to be mochek in a place of the godesh? Which means, if the minhag is to give a little bit over, how do we know that I could just cut off the top part and like flatten it in order to give it to you? Ve'en godshim kol shemochkin, or the other way around. I cannot put it above over if the minhag is to be mocheh. Talmud Omar comes to teach you efa shelema. What does that mean? Same for everybody, right? Efa shelema v'tzedek. Uminayin she'im amar arin mochek b'mkom shegodshin ve'lifchot lo min adamim v'arini godesh b'mkom shemochkin ve'losif lo al adamim she'en shomim lo. What happens if a person comes and he says, you know what? I'm going to do this. The minhag is to give you exact. Right. I'm going to add, but I'm going to charge you. Or the minhag is to give more, right? Gadush. But you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to be mochek, right? I'm going to flatten it, and then I'll take off a few pennies from you. How do we know that you don't do that? Okay, fine. Next, Tanu Rabbanan. We learned on the Braita. How do we know that you're not going to sell the kapol muznayin uzanot in a place where they have a minhag to be machriya? Ve'en machriin, right? Bimkom shemayinim, right? Which means that you do it ayn ba'ayn. That's what we're saying. So how do we know that we're not going to be ma'ayin, right? In a place where they're the machriya, which means that they actually come and they use these utensils to weigh, okay? Or the other way around. So Talmud Omar even shlema minayin she'im amar hareni ma'ayin, right? Which means I'm going to straighten them out. Bimkom shemachriim ve'lifchot lo min adamim v'hareni machriya bimkom shemayinim lo'osif lo adamim she'en shomim lo. Okay, so again, everything is going to be like the minhag hamidina. That's the concept. Amar of Yuda Misura says of Yuda Misura. What does it mean? Lo yel lecha ve'vetecha. So you're not supposed to have in your house, whether it's going to be efa ve'efa or g'dola k'tana. Matam, what's the reasoning? Right? He says mishum efa ve'efa. He says it's going to come and to hint us, right? Shelo yel lecha bekisecha matam. So 1 second. What's the reason why you shouldn't have it in your house? Because of efa ve'efa, which means that you're not going to trick people with it. So why can you have it in your pocket? Mishum even va'even, right? Because of the big measurement and the small measurement of the stones. Aval, but he says even shlema v'tzedek, takpid, that you should always have a sata v'natata b'emunah, which means you should always have, right, the proper weights. Yelecha, right, and you should have in your pocket a lot of money. Efa shlema v'tzedek yelecha, meaning basically it's a play on words. It's basically saying if you're going to come and you're going to do even shlema yelecha. Not that you should have, you will have. You will have what? A lot of money. I mean, when you come and you fulfill the Torah the way you're supposed to, you're going to have a lot of money. Okay? The third braita. Tanu Rabbanan, we learned the braita. What does it mean? Even shlema v'tzedek yelach. Lamed shema medina gardamin lemidot, which means we don't have, right, the pikidim in charge of the midot. Or, right, on the sharim. What does that mean? Something very, very interesting. Do you know many times you go whether it's to gas stations or to all these places, and it says this machine was checked by the I don't know what of agriculture and I don't know what, to measure that everything is actually accurate and I don't know what. Yeah, that's what you're saying right here. We don't do that, right? How do we know that we don't put the gardamin? The gardamin or the pekudim. These are the ones, the ministers, the ones that are in charge, right, to make sure that the midot, the weights are purpose. Yes, inspectors. That the midot are proper and the sharim and the prices are the same thing. We don't put people in charge of it. The Benesia ukimo, but there was a story with the Benesia that they did do it. They did it for both. Says Shmuel Lekarna, go teach them this Braita. The Braita says that you could do it to midot for the weights, for the scales, but not for the sharim, for the prices. So he said you could do both. Elmaleh, what's your name? Right? So Shmuel came and he told him, what's your name? He says, Karna. He says, Tepukle Karna Be'ene. Right? You should have a keren in your eye. You should have a keren. His name was Karna. You should have a keren in your eyes. Right? Why? He cursed him. Yes. Why did he curse him? Because he went and he told him, this is what you have to teach them. And then he went out and he said, yeah, you can do whatever you want. So what happened? Nafkale Karna Be'ene. They came out a keren, right, in his eyes.
They were cataract or a pimple.
Yeah. So here he says, right, 1 second, the Ihu in Karna, who did he hold like? Meaning if Shmuel told him something and he's going against, he had to, you have to have something. You can't just go against Shmuel. So he says, he says, no, it was Rabbi Chaman named Rabbi Yitzchak. He says that you are allowed to come and to appoint these inspectors, whether it's going to be for the measures or for the prices. Why? Because of the Ramma'im. Because of the cheaters.
Swindlers.
Not the swindlers, the cheaters. Yeah. Which one? No, you're allowed to put inspectors because of the cheaters.
The
right?
Price
exactly. You understand? As a Gemara, Tanu Rabbanan, we learned in a Braita. If he asks for a litra, he's going to measure a litra. Chetzi litra, shokelo chetzi litra. Revia litra, shokelo revia litra. Says Gemara, my question, obviously. If I ask you for a half a liter, obviously you're going to give me half a liter. If I ask you for a liter, you're going to give me a liter. If I ask you a quarter. Obviously, what's the Gemara teaching us? So he says, that we're going to be metkinim the mishkalot until here, which means that the lowest level is a quarter. Right? That's what the chidush was. The chidush is that I don't go below a quarter. So if you're going to come in and say, you know what? I want 125 milliliters. I apologize. The lowest interval, the lowest number that I'm giving you is a quarter. Because that's what it is. A quarter litra. That's all that there is. So Tanu Rabbanan, we learned in a Braita. What happens if he's asking for 3/4 litra? Right? 3/4 of this measurement. Lo yomar lo, you shouldn't tell him shekol shlosha revia litra achat achat, ela shokel litra umeniach revia litra im basar. He says, but rather you have to come. Don't tell him and say, you know what, I'm going to do every single quarter separately. But rather what happens is that he's going to put, right, the mishkal of a litra, and then what happens is he's going to put the mishkal of the revia litra, right, in the other one with the basar. You know, so what happened? No. That means basically what he's going to do is he's going to take on the one side the full, very nice, you have a nice picture there, right? The full litra, right? The stone of a full litra. Now on the other side, what do? So you know what you do? You put the stone of a 1/4 litra with the meat.
Makes sense.
And now it becomes a litra.
Makes sense.
One more time. On one side, the stone of a litra, and the other side, you have the meat with a 1/4 litra stone.
Smart.
And then it's going to average out. Because you asked for 3/4, right? You asked for 3/4. So how do I do the calculation? He said you have a full, half, or a quarter. I asked now 3/4. How do you do it? Very simple. No, you don't have. Again, one more time. Let me go back. Braita. You have litra, chetzi litra, and a 1/4 litra. Those are the stones. That's all that you have. Now I come and ask you, listen, Rafi, I want 3/4. Now how do you do it? So don't put a 1/4 with the meat, a 1/4 with the meat, a 1/4 with the meat. No. You put a full litra, and then here you put a 1/4, and you put the thing. Okay, that's what it says. The Gemara says you don't do it. Okay? Litra is a measure. It's a measure, right? It's a measure. Yeah, it's a...
Nowadays, litra is different.
Yeah. Here it's a weight. It's shokel. It's shokel. Shokel. Yeah. Yeah, fine. Again, it's a measure. It doesn't matter. But again, here we're talking about the actual weight, because obviously we're talking about you're putting the weight in it. But part of the volume is volume. I don't care about what the thing. Fill up the whatever it is, the space, and that's it. Okay? Fine. So he says now like this. He says, we have the picture, Richard, but it's on the next page. We learned it of Raita. What happens if he asks for 10 litrim? Don't tell him do it one by one. Right? And then it's always going to be good for each one. Because basically what's happening is I get the extra on every single one. It says no. You do all of them in one shot. And therefore you only get it one. Meaning like this, if I'm going to buy, let's say I measure, and I always want to make sure that I'm never cheating you out. So what do? Instead of giving you 1 pound, I'm giving you 1 pound, 0.001. Now, if you do that on the 20 pounds, on every single one, you're gaining. So therefore, he's saying you don't do it separately on every single one. What you do is the one shot, and therefore you just gain, you just add a little bit at the end, but it's not that you're going to do it one by one. Tanu Rabbanan, we learned to the Braita. Okay, Nefesh Moznaim. Right, we're talking about now the Merkaz Moznaim, which is basically the center of the weights of the scales. So he says Tluya Ba'avir, it's going to be hanging in there. Shloshat Tfachim, right? He says Shloshat Tfachim, right? It's going to be within 3 Tfachim from the roof. Ugvoa mina aret Shloshat Tfachim. So he says it also is going to be 3 Tfachim from the ground. Yeah. Oh, one second. Yeah. He says, right? He says over here. He says because you wanted to always leave, right, in order that it doesn't touch whether it's going to be the ground or the thing, because that's the way of the achlal, how you're actually passing like the weights. So he says, right, v'akaneh umitna shela. We're talking about now the mot, which is like the stick, right, and the chutim is going to be 12 tfachim. It's going to be 12 tfachim. The shel samarim is the ones which are selling wool. The shel sagagim, or of the zagag is of glass. Tluya ba'avir 2 tfachim. It's going to be 2 tfachim. Ugvoa. Also, it's going to be Gva Minal Shel Tvachim. So basically, whatever the height is above, it's below as well. Right? We had 3 and 3. That was talking about the regular Moznaim. Now, when we're talking about for wool and glass, it's going to be 2. Right? Right? And then he says, if it's going to be a Chemvani in a Balabait, which is going to be a house in your house, basically, that you're selling it from your house, it's going to be 1 tefach and 1 tefach. Is going to be 6 tefachim. Okay? The Shel Turtani. Now, if it's going to be of somebody that's talking about very expensive metals, it's going to be 3 fingers, right, from the top and 3 fingers from the bottom. And I don't know any idea. So says the Gemara. 1 second. What was the first one? One more time. Well, the first one we said was 3 above and 3 below, but we didn't say what it was for. Then all of a sudden we went and we said if you have wool and you have glass, and then it's going to be 2 and 2. And then we come and we said if it's going to be a chenvani and balabait, it's going to be, right, the tefach. And then if it's going to be expensive metals, it's going to be it's about 3 fingers by 3 fingers. What was the first one then? Hakamaita demai. So says the Gemara, right? Right? He says like this. He says, Peitet Amud Bet, right? He says, Peitet Amud Bet is 89b. He says, Amar of Papa comes and he says, Diagrume. What does it mean, Diagrume? He says, we're talking about We're talking about iron and copper. Okay, those are the ones. Okay. No, that's the first one. Okay, fine. So basically, right, he comes and he says, basically, right, they're more precise when it's going to be with the different, right, as it goes down. So since it's going to be more precise, so therefore you need less of a space in order that it shouldn't touch the roof, right, or the floor. Okay. Now another halakha to do with this. Amar Rabbi Mani bar Patish, says Rabbi Mani bar Patish, right? Kederek she'amru linyan isurim, right? Isuran kach amru linyan tumatan. Just like we talked about the isur of the midot, so too we're talking about the tum'ah of the midot as well, which means that you're not allowed to come and to be mishtamesh, and therefore it's not a kli anymore. Okay, so the same thing to do with the concept of the moznaim as well, that you cannot use these moznaim in such a fact. So he comes and he says, Shalom, what are we talking about? Tanina, we already learned this. It's going to be tefach. So he says, he says, we're talking about the kaneh and the mitna. So talking about also the kaneh and also the tum'ah, right? Which we actually didn't teach them together. So Rabbi Mani was coming and saying that even these shurim to do a tum'ah is the same thing that we mentioned before. Okay, Tanu Rabbanan, we also learned in the Braita. אין עושים משקלו לא בשל עץ ושלא של איבר ולא של גיסקונים ולא של שם מיני מתכות, אבל הוא עושה של צוממה ושל זכוכית. You know that you're not allowed to come and make the mishkalot not out of ba'ats. What is ba'ats? Ba'ats is bedil.
Kin.
right? What did you say?
Kin.
Tin. Thank you. Right? V'shelavar. Oh, that's plum. That's the lead. Yeah, that's oferet. Right? Velo shel gisteron. What is
Alloys.
gisteron? Alloys, right? Different types of metals, right? Combined metals, right? The oferet, right? No, sorry, gisteron, right? Shivre matachot uravivim. Velo shel sher minei metachot, right? And not other types of metals, right? But he says, aval oseh shel tsuma, which is basically a very strong stone, or of zechuchit, of glass. Right? Why? Because they don't become rusty and they don't break and they don't start like taking off or whatever it is. So Tana Rabbanan, we learned in the Braita. We're not going to make a kli, which basically was used for the mechika, right, out of dlat, okay, which is basically from the klipa of dlat, neshu kal, because it doesn't go inside the tvuah and it doesn't actually take it off, which means they used to have a utensil which just come and level off, right, the keli. So he says you can't make it from a dlat, okay, from the klipat of the dlat, of the pumpkin. Velo shel matechet, or not of metal, because it's machbid. It comes and it might take off too much. You could do it from an etz zait or etz egos, from the tree of whether it's an olive tree or a walnut tree, or shel shikma, sycamore tree, or shel ishkiroa. How do you say ishkiroa in English, Richard?
I'm a little bit.
Okay, it's basically it's in between, meaning we don't want it to become too heavy and we don't want it to become too light. Yeah. So he says, right? Fine. You're never going to make this machak on one side wide and one side narrow. Okay, so again, the same thing. Now, why? Again, the part which is going to be narrow will go inside well, and it's going to do too much, and the other side, which is too wide, is not going to do it properly. So therefore, again, it has to be the same. You don't do it in one shot. It's always going to be bad for the seller and good for the buyer, purchaser. You don't do a little by little. Why? Because that's going to be the mocher. It's going to be bad for the purchaser and good for the seller. Al kulan, on all the things that we said here. What to if I'm going to say it and what if I'm not going to say it? If I'm going to say it, because then you know what's going to happen. The tricksters, he called them the swindlers, right? They're going to the con artists, if you want to call them, yeah? They're going to find out how to trick even more. Because if I'm going to come and I'm going to tell you you're not allowed to do something, why? Because that way you're doing something wrong. So the guy that's smart is exactly what he's going to do, because you just taught me how to do it, right? So for example, I'm going to come and I'm going to say, listen, don't do this with your phone, because if not, the hackers could come in. I just gave the hackers an idea how to come in, right? It's true, right, that I just told the people to warn themselves, but people that don't know, right, you just gave them ideas. You just taught them how to do it, what to do. So he says, if I'm not going to say, but if I'm not going to say it, the swindlers are going to say, the rabbis don't know what do we do. And really, we know exactly what they do. We know everything what happens. Okay? So we ask the question then. So did he say it or didn't he say it at the end? He said, woe to me if I say it, woe to me if I don't say it. So what? So you don't do it? So you say it or you don't say it then? So Amar Shmuel bar Yitzchak says Shmuel bar Yitzchak Amara. So they said, and they said from this pasuk they said, Ki yesharim darchei Hashem v'tzadikim yilchubam poshim mikashrubam. Right? This is, by the way, the Chavetz Chaim, he actually brings this in his Haktamah. He says, if I'm going to write down the halachot of Yilchot Lashon Ra, people are going to look at my book to find the kulot, ki'ilu, that, and I never even meant it. But he says, I had to write it. Why? Yesharim darchei Hashem, tzadikim yilchubam poshim mikashrubam. Right? Many times you could say something. The tzadikim, they'll go on the right path. The Reshaim, they'll come and they'll destroy it. Right? And they'll come and say, no, but Rabbi, I'm doing you a favor, and this is what you meant, and this is what you said. Don't do favors. You know exactly what I meant. You know exactly what I mean, and therefore forget about it. You understand? Again, that's the way people are. You understand? Fine. Tanu Rabbanan, we learned in a Braita. Lo ta'asu avel b'mishpat, b'midah b'mishkal b'mesurah. What does it mean? You're not allowed to do iniquity in the mishpat. B'midah, mishkal b'mesurah. B'midah is mididat karka. Yeah, mididat karka. Right? And the kavanah is shelo yimdod le'echad b'imot ha'chamal u'echad b'imot ha'geshamim. You shouldn't measure not for one in the summer, not for one in the geshamim, right? With the same chevel. Because basically what happens is it changes, right? It changes. So he says, b'mishkal, shelo yatmin, right? Mishkelotav b'melach. Right? He says that you should not come and you should not hide it in the sand. Because again, it's going to cause the difference. Meaning if you're going to come and you're going to insulate it in the sand, it's going to change the mishkal, right? Because of the sand. The salt, sorry. Right? The salt. Right? He says, "B'misura." What is misura? He comes and says, "Shelo yartiach." What does that mean? He says, when you're coming and you're going to measure liquids, do not come and do not do it very, very quickly or from a very tall thing. Why? Because then what happens is you have like the
Froth.
froth. That's
Froth.
Okay, froth.
Beer. Pour
Right?
a glass
Exactly.
of beer.
Beer, right? The gas that you see on the top, you know, you call the froth. Yeah. So he says, and therefore it's going to be chaser, right? The kalvachomer, and he says we learn a kalvachomer here. Uma mesura sheyecha mishloshim v'shisha below. Just like the mesura is going to be 1/36 in a load. Hekpida alav Torah, and the Torah was makpida. Kalvachomer hin v'chetzi ayin shoshita ayin uvita ayin v'log v'chetzi log uvita v'toman v'chetzi toman v'chla. Basically, these are all different measurements. So all the more so, right? A person, if you're going to come, you're going to start heating it up. It's going to change, right? The different things, and therefore, again, here it doesn't mean literally to heat up. We're talking about that you're doing it in such a fashion that it's going to be. That's why even in beer and other things, they teach you how to pour it in order that there shouldn't be a lot of the froth, right? Because if not, it looks like you have a full cup, and afterwards you have a half a cup. You understand? That's just the way that it is. Fine. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Says Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Asul adam she'Hashem midah chasera yitera b'tok beto. You're never allowed to keep midah which is pasul in your house. Even if you're going to use it as the for urination, right? For menaglayim. Yeah. No, you're using it as a garbage or whatever it is. Not allowed to. Okay. By the way, you should know. Right? They do that until nowadays. If you go to the bank and you give them a counterfeit bill, they don't give it back to you and tell you it's counterfeit. They keep it, right? Because they're not going to give it back to you, right? Because again, that's this. They don't want you to have it. Even if you're going to swear to them, you're going to promise. Doesn't matter. Somebody can't did that. That's it. The second is that's it. There's out. Yeah, that's what he says. Rav Papa says, Lo Amran, they didn't say this, that's only in a place where they're not going to sign it, right? You could actually come and trick somebody. There's in a place where they come and they sign that this is what you're allowed to use or not. If you don't see the chatima there, like what I told you about the, like that sticker on the thing, right? That's it. You're not going to use it. In a place where they didn't sign it, they didn't say it. When there's not going to be the kings, the inspectors, that they're going to come, they're going to check it. Why? Because there's not going to be subas. Nobody is going to do it because they're going to get caught. They're afraid that they might get caught, so therefore they're not going to use it. But says the Gemara, but it's not true. It could be ben hashashot. You might actually come to use it, and then that's it. And nobody's going to come during ben hashashot to come checking up on you. Meaning, mamash, when you're closing, they're not going to check up on you, so therefore you're not allowed to have it as well. Also, we learned this in the Braita. Lo yeshed adam midah chasera yitera b'toch betov. Afilu avit shem reglayim, even if it's going to be a bit shem reglayim. Aval oseh se'at terka v'chatzi terka v'ka v'chatzi terka v'rova v'toman v'chatzi toman. But you have to make all these different utensils, right? The achla, right? The uchla, and then obviously we're going to speak about the uchla. Okay, of all these different.